Masechet Hagigah Daf Bet, and the final Masechet in Seder Moed. Very exciting. This Masechet is going to go into the realm of Kodashim and the first half, and Taharot in the second half. So we begin with the obligation of bringing a korban. It's called Hagigah, referring to the korban Hagigah. Although actually there are three different obligatory korbanot that are associated with the holidays. So whenever someone comes to visit Yerushalayim, especially on the Shalosh Regalim, one has to bring with him three things. One is an olat re'iyah. It's a korban olah for the mitzvah to come to Jerusalem for the regel, to be there and see and be seen, and you can't come empty-handed. So this first obligation we learned from the pasuk in Devarim: Shalosh pamim bashana yireh kol zechurecha et penei Adonai Elohecha. 3 times a year, all of your males. That's going to be important halacha here. Only males are obligated to see the face of God in the place that Hashem will choose. The 3 holidays: Velo yeraeh et penei Adonai rekam. And they shall not appear empty-handed. They shall not be seen empty. In other words, there's an obligation to come to your friend's wedding, and when you come, you got to bring a present too, right? So they go hand in hand. And so too here, this is the obligation of an olat re'iyah, bringing a korban olah upon being seen and coming to the Bet HaMikdash. That's number 1. Second obligatory korban is shalmei Hagigah. In order to celebrate the holiday, we bring a shelamim, and shelamim would be everybody would eat it together like a big barbecue. Some of it goes to the kohanim and the mizbeach, but most of it goes to the owner. And then besides that, if someone would require more meat because they have a big party and they want to celebrate extra, then another mitzvah is to bring shalmei Hagigah. Shalmei simcha, because v'samachta b'chagah, you have to be happy, and you are extra happy when you can have a big barbecue together. So those are the 3 korbanot we're going to be talking about today. We're actually only going to talk about the first and the third. And so olat re'iyah, shalmei Hagigah, and shalmei simcha. So we begin. Hakol chayavin ba re'iyah chutz me cheresh shoteh v'katan. Everyone is obligated to come on Aliyah Laregel and bring with them an olah, except for someone who is a deaf mute. We're going to be discussing this mostly today. Does this mean deaf and mute, or deaf or mute? That'll be the main part of the daf. And the second person is shoteh. That's the outline. Vekatan. What do these people have in common? Is that they are not of sound mind. In those days, someone who was born deaf, they did not know how to educate them. And so they would not get an education and not know how to read, write, interact. And so they were not responsible for making decisions or for making them obligatory. Similar to someone who is not sane and a child who also cannot be held responsible for their decisions or for doing something as a mitzvah. Good, that's category 1. Second category, tumtum v'androginos v'nashim v'avadim she'enam meshuchrarim. Well, we'll start with nashim. Women are not obligated. We just mentioned the source called zechurecha. Also, this is a mitzvat aseh shazaman gerama. It's a certain time, and you have to come and be there and bring your korban. And so nashim were not obligated. And so too avadim. This would be a Canaanite slave that is owned by a Jew, and has not been freed. So an Eved Kanaani is kind of like a half a convert and is required to do mitzvot on the same level as women need to. And so therefore, since women are not obligated, Avadim, the Eved Kanani also is not obligated. The idea is that their time is not their own. Their time belongs to their master, and the master has jobs and responsibilities for them. A woman also has responsibilities in her home and her family. And so they cannot be commanded to be somewhere at a specific time to do something. Okay, because they are not obligated, tumtum androginos. Tumtum is someone who has no explicit genitalia, so cannot tell what his sex is. Androginos is someone who has both male and female signs, and so both of these are in doubt. And since they, one understanding is since they may be women and therefore would be not obligated. That's generally the reason why Tumtum and Aginos would be not obligated. The Gemara will discuss this further in a couple of dapim, the reason for their exemption. Third category, Hagigah, Hasoma, Hachole v'hazaken, u'misha no yachol la'alot beraglav. This category, they would chayav in other mitzvot, mitzvot aseh, they're regular, they're sane, they're men, so they're obligated. But they're just this particular mitzvah, they cannot walk properly, so they can't get there. So someone who is lame or is blind, and I guess they could be led there, but they can't get there on their own because they can't see. And someone who's sick or elderly, or for whatever other reason, cannot walk on his feet. So shalosh regalim, literally, you have to be able to walk there, and these people just can't get there. And so that's the three categories of exemptions. There are other people that are exempt, like someone who's tameh. But here, these are all people that are exempt because some intrinsic reason of their identity. Although there are others that we'll see are patur because of some external reason. Okay, ezehu katan, and now the Mishnah itself is going to define what a katan is. I imagine if we ask anybody, what is the definition of katan? Someone who's not bar mitzvah or in the case bar mitzvah. However, the Mishnah does not say that. It says, Kol she'eno yachol lirkov al ketefav shel aviv ve'la'alot miYerushalayim lahar habayit divrei bet Shammai. A katan is a kid who is so young that he would not even be able to ride on his father's shoulders to get to Jerusalem. Even if he can't walk very much, but he can ride on his father's shoulders, then that child has to go. How old is that? I don't know, like 3 years old. A 3-year-old can ride just fine and balance himself and have a good time riding on his father's shoulders. And so even a 3-4-year-old, certainly 5-year-old would be obligated to go to Aliyad Laregel and bring a korban with him. I guess he could join in with his father's. I don't know, maybe bring his own, according to Bet Shammai. ובית הלל אומרים, כל שאינו יכול לאחוז בידו של אביו ולעלות מירושלים להר הבית, שנאמר 3 רגלים. Bet Hillel is more lenient and says a child who cannot get there by walking, even if he holds on to his father's hand, is exempt. But if he knows how to walk, even if he's not so steady and needs some support from his father to hold his hand and walk there, and must go. So this is maybe a bit older, maybe like 6 years old or 7, would be able to get there and would be obligated. So this is interesting why it's not bar mitzvah. And the explanation for that is that if you look at early rabbinic sources and Tannaitic sources, bar mitzvah is not the cutoff date for all matters. Rather, for each and every mitzvah, you have to see, is this child capable of doing this mitzvah? And whenever they're ready, physically, mentally, to do a given mitzvah, then they must do it. And so bar mitzvah is, that idea comes later on in halachic literature, that's the single cutoff for all mitzvot. But in Tannaitic times, people under 13, if they were capable for a given mitzvah, were obligated to do it. So that's a little interesting history of halacha. Yitzchak Gilat has a fantastic article about that. Next, Bet Shammai אומרים הראייה שתי כסף, החגיגה מאה כסף, ובית הלל אומרים הראייה מאה כסף, והחגיגה שתי כסף. How much does one need to spend on these korbanot? So korban re'iyah, Bet Shammai says you have to spend 2 silver coins, whereas the shalmei Hagigah only 1. Whereas Bet Hillel says the opposite. Bet Hillel says you spend less on the olah, that all gets burned, and you spend more on the shilamim that you are going to eat and make a big barbecue. That is the double shete chesef. So Bet Hillel's barbecues would be bigger than Bet Shammai's. Of course, there's only a minimum, right? You don't want to bring any korban that's a little scrawny, cheap item. You have to bring something that is presentable. The question is just how presentable. Fantastic. And now we get to the Gemara, and here is a quick outline of what we're about to see. When the Mishnah says hakol chayavin, why does it need to add that extra word hakol? Generally, when the Mishnah says that, it means it's including something else that it didn't mention, also must give. So we're going to see 3 opinions. One said that the word hakol is including someone who's half slave, half free. Or a second option, someone who's lame only for the first day of the holiday, but then gets better. Or someone who is blind in one eye. We're going to reject 1 and 2, support number 3, and then we're going to go back to support number 1. So we'll end up being that 1 and 3 are good options. All right, so the Mishnah right here that says hakol chayavin be'riyah. What is this word hakol adding? Le'atuye mai. Number 1, le'atuye mi shechesyo eved v'chesyo ben chorim. Okay, since we said that someone who is eved does not do aliyah laregel, is not obligated, but someone who is free is. So how about the half guy? Yep, half. His free half has to drag along his slave half to go to Jerusalem. All right, so that's a good option for most people, except for Ravina. Ravina said that someone who's half does not need to go. It's his slave half keeps him home and says, sorry, I can't go. I got to work in the house here. And so the free half can't go either, which makes sense. So then in that case, the word hakol, what is it coming to include? Not this guy. Second answer, someone who was lame on the first day, maybe he broke his leg, he was in a cast and he was not able to walk. And then he was able to get the cast off and he's healed. And now he can walk on the second day of the holiday or the third day of the holiday. And so then he goes, is he obligated since he didn't get there the first day? Is he obligated? Yes. Hakol comes to say, even though you missed the first day, nevertheless, come and do the second day. Okay. Well, this logic would work if you think that the obligation to be in the Bet HaMikdash and appear applies every single day of the holiday equally. You don't have to bring it every day. You only have to bring one. But on any day of the holiday, you can bring it. Best to bring it on the first day because you want to do things right away. If you didn't get a chance to do it on the first day, then there's a new obligation to do it on the second day, a separate one. And so you could do it on any day, and each day will compensate for any other day that you didn't do it beforehand or afterwards. So therefore, according to that opinion, since every day is a separate obligation, and he was lame on the first day, so he was patur on the first day, but now he's better, so bring it on the second day. Okay, then that would make sense that we would include it. But we're going to see there's a whole machloket about this. Another opinion says that all the subsequent days are makeup days for the first. In other words, really, the only obligation to appear and bring a korban re'iyah is on the first day of the holiday. That's the only obligation. Now, if you didn't, then we'll do a makeup on day 2 for day 1. But really, the one on day 2 is just to make up for day 1, not a separate obligation. Or the third day also goes back to day 1 because it's all going back to day 1. And this guy, on the first day, he was lame. Therefore, on the first day, he couldn't walk. He's patur. And since he was patur on the first day, he does not have to bring a makeup at all on any of the other days. You only do a makeup if you were obligated to begin with. He wasn't obligated, and so he's okay. So, of course, this answer only works according to one opinion. What about the other opinion? What would he say? Okay, of course, the other opinion might be is not Ravina, so we can go back to the first one, right? But I think the Gemara is going through this exercise in order to bring new, interesting cases that aren't addressed and kind of on the borderline to try to test out these principles, like what is the essence of the law. Which is especially good for an opening sugya. An opening sugya always wants to be a little theoretical and test out lots of cases that are going to come up later on. Okay, so our third option, la tuya soma be'achat me'anav. By the proper pronunciation of a blind person is not suma, as is often punctuated, but soma, which is in manuscripts. In one eye. Okay, if someone is blind in both eyes, they are not going to be able to find their way. They are patur. But a one-eyed person, he should be able to make it. And so hakol comes to include, yes, he does have to. All right. Odelaki haytana detanya Yochanan ben Dehavai omer mishum Rabbi Yehuda soma be'achat me'anav patur min hare'iyah shenemar yera'e yir'e kederech sheba lir'ot kach ba le'ra'ot ma lir'ot b'shtei einav af le'ra'ot b'shtei einav. Not everybody agrees to this principle because we have in this baraita Yochanan ben Navai says that someone who is blind in one eye does not need to bring a korban re'iyah. And he knows that because the word yera'eh can also be punctuated as yir'eh. Let's look at the pasuk again. Velo yera'eh pnei Hashem, or shosh pamim bashana yera'eh kol zechurecha. You could read it as yir'eh kol zechurecha et pnei Hashem. That Hashem's face will see you coming, or can be seen. Now, actually, scholars think that perhaps the original reading was actually yir'eh, that 3 times Hashem should see you. But we want to take off the anthropomorphism and not say God sees as God seeing you, but rather be seen, right? 3 days you will be seen. Or that actually the opposite. 3 times you will go and see God. That's the problem of anthropomorphism. How could you say that 3 times you should go and see God? Now, really, it could say that, not that they're going to see Hashem's actual face, but seeing the Bet HaMikdash, seeing the Mishkan, seeing the Kodesh Kodashim, right? Seeing that presence, Shekhinah, will give them a sense of seeing God. But in order to remove that direct idea that anyone could see God, because God has no form, so therefore we read it as Yera'eh. Anyway, there's a kind of double reading here, Yir'eh, Yera'eh, and this Baraita plays on that reading and says, since it can be read both ways, therefore we learn that just as someone comes to see, he also comes to be seen. Just like one is seen with 2 eyes, meaning when Hashem sees you, Hashem has 2 eyes. Again, metaphorically, God doesn't have any eyes, but when we refer to an anthropomorphic God, we think of him as having 2 eyes. So therefore, just like God is not blind, not in 1 eye, not in 2 eyes, has 2 seeing eyes, so too, being seen, the person being seen, the pilgrim coming up, has to also have 2 eyes. All right, that's his derivation, that only someone who has 2 seeing eyes must bring korban re'iyah, and someone who has only 1 eye does not have to. And according to that, the third answer is actually rejected. And so each of the 3 answers is only good according to some opinion, but not another opinion. Okay. But if you want, so all these 3 have someone who rejects it, but also someone who accepts it. But you know what? Going back to the first one, we can actually make the first one work according to everybody. We're going to go back to our initial answer back here, that it's someone who is half slave and half free. They are included, they must bring a korban re'iyah. And that which you asked, that according to Ravina, he says, patur, no, don't worry about that. La kashya. Kan kemishna rishona, kan kemishna acharona. One of these statements is referring to the original law, and one to the later law. Okay, there's a machloket about which one is which. Let's explain it first, and we'll try to give a simple explanation. So here it is. Ditnan. We have a Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim. It says, Mi shechesyo eved v'chesyo ben chorin, oved et rabo yom echad v'et asmo yom echad. Divrei bet Hillel. Someone who is a half slave and half free, well, what is he going to do? How could you have such a case of someone half and half? It means that 2 people partnered up and bought a slave, right? Or partners. You could be partners in buying a house. You could be partners in buying a vessel. You could be partners in buying a slave. And then one of the parties freed his share in the slave. Okay, so then what's this guy going to do? Well, simple. He'll split his time. You can't split the body of the person. I'm not going to take his right half. You take his left half. Then he won't be alive. So instead, we split his time. And so his master, who still owns him, he'll work for him one day, and every other day, he has his own time. That's his free day, working day. Very good. So this is sustainable. Okay, you found a good solution for the master, because the masters are happy, right? The one who owns him, half of him, works him every other day. But you didn't find a good solution for him himself, right? Look at it from his perspective of the slave, of the half slave. He's not allowed to marry another shifcha. If he was a full slave, then he could marry a shivcha. He could have a wife, he could have a family. But because he's half free, a free person, a full Jew cannot marry a shivcha Kanaanit, so he can't marry her. Now, bat chorin and oyachol, he also cannot marry a free woman, a Jewish woman, because a Eved Kanaani cannot marry a Jewish woman. Now he can't marry anybody. And so poor guy, he can't have a family. So maybe you'll say, oh, sorry, he can't have a family, batel, right? So be celibate. No, you can't ask anybody to not have children because Hashem made the world for procreation. First mitzvah, Adam says it, right? And another pasuk in Yeshaya, God did not create the world to stay in chaos and waste. He created the world so that it should be settled. So there's an individual obligation upon every person to have children, and therefore it's not reasonable to ask him to never marry, and he can't marry if he's half and half. So not a good solution, not for him. Rather, we make an enactment that the Bet Din will come and force the master, who still owns half, to free the other half. If one party, one of the partners frees half, the other one must free the other half, and he has to write him a contract that says you are free for the other, and the master will pay, and the slave will write a bill to the master to pay for his half. In other words, even if he doesn't have the money now, he'll say, listen, I owe you for the other half that you freed me. So it's not fair. I shouldn't just be able to free him and not get any compensation for it. So yes, he'll be compensated eventually. And that way the person goes free. When Bet Hillel heard that from Bet Shammai, they said, you know what? That's a good point. I agree with you. Right. All this was said by Bet Shammai. And then Bet Hillel says, you're right. He has to be free. Okay, so that's the Mishnah Rishona. Mishnah Rishona said, what Bet Hillel originally said, that someone can be a half slave and half free. If he's half free and half slave, at that point, and that's considered sustainable, that's when our Mishnah that says Hakol was coming to include such a person. Because that's a sustainable model, you can be half free, half slave, and your free half is obligated to go. So then the law is your free half will go, and maybe he'll have to go on his free day, and he will drag along the slave half of him. And that's what the Mishnah is talking about. However, once Bet Hillel changed his mind and says, oh, Bet Shammai, you know what? You're right. This is not a sustainable guy. He can't even be half free if he's half a slave, right? If you're half a slave, it's worse for him than being free at all. So therefore, Ravina says, no, if he's half free, half slave, this is an unstable situation. He is actually more stuck than just a slave person, and therefore he does not have to go, right? Someone who's half-half, until we get the contract written, he's enslaved. And so he's not in charge of his own time and body, and therefore is not obligated until we go and bring him to court and we force the master to free him, and then and only then he will go. So I think that's the correct explanation. There are some who try to flip it around and say, no, while he's half free and half slave, since eventually this court will force him, so it's like he's already free now. But according to that, Ravina would be the original before he changed his mind. And that would make sense because Ravina lives much later. Okay, and so now we resolved that situation, and we saw that the word all can include lame for the first day or blind in one eye according to one opinion, and it can be half slave and half free, even according to Ravina. So number one is acceptable to all. And so now we got to learn about all these interesting cases. All right, now another kind of half cases. We know that cheresh, meaning a cheresh can have two meanings. Cheresh can refer to someone who's a deaf mute, meaning someone who was born deaf and never learned to talk, who in those days was not educatable. Or it can refer, the word cheresh can mean to someone who is only deaf. Like, let's say they were born hearing, and so they learned how to talk, and they went to school, and only later on they became deaf. So I could refer to one or the other. So we know that someone who's deaf and mute is exempt. But what about someone who's only deaf or only mute, right? Maybe they can hear fine, but something wrong with their mouth and they're unable to speak. Is that obligated? First, we say obligated, and then we discuss it more. We're going to conclude that someone that's either deaf or mute is also exempt, not only someone both. Here we go. Chutz mecheresh shote v'katan. Katani cheresh dumiyade shote v'katan. Look, see how the Mishnah lumps together these three? So that means the cheresh is someone who is has a similarity to shote v'katan. Ma shote v'katan delav b'nei de'ah. Someone who's insane or a child, they are not of sound mind. Saf cheresh delav bar de'ahu. So the cheresh we're talking about is someone who's not of sound mind. So that means a deaf mute is not of sound mind. וכמשמען כדתנן, חירש שדיברו חכמים בכל מקום, שאינו שומע ואינו מדבר. המדבר ואינו שומע. שומע ואינו מדבר, חייב. Right? And here's what we learned, that חירש, when the sages speak of a חירש, it means someone who is both deaf and mute. Therefore, if he can speak but can't hear, or if he can hear but cannot speak, that person would be obligated. Because after all, if he can hear, so he's of sound mind. He can make decisions, it's totally fine. All right, so one or the other would not be like a shote and katan. And we have a proof from a Tosefta. Tanen aleha detanu rabbanan. Medaber ve'eno shomea zeu cheresh. Shomea ve'eno medaber zeu ilem. So this is giving a definition, one definition of cheresh. Someone who speaks but cannot hear, he's called a cheresh. Cheresh has two meanings. Someone who can hear but not speak, that's called ilem, mute. But in both of these, if you can do one or the other, they are of sound mind for all matters, and therefore it makes sense. One or the other must bring korban re'iyah. Only a deaf mute is exempt from korban re'iyah. Good. Continuing the same opinion. What's your derivation of these words? What's your etymology? Pasuk says, I am like a cheresh, deaf, and I don't hear. So there you go. So cheresh, someone who doesn't hear. I am like an ilem. I am like someone who is dumb or mute. I cannot open my mouth. So you see that the word ilem means someone who cannot speak. So that's a clear proof that of these two words and what they mean. Or another derivation, sometimes people say his speech has been taken from him. And there's an acronym here of ilem. Here's the aleph and the lamed and the mem. So ilem, so someone who can't get these words out is called an ilem. Second proof. All right, all that was backing number one here, that someone who's only deaf or mute is obligated in korban re'iyah. But now we're about to quote an opposing baraita, and we're actually going to prefer this baraita over the Tosefta that we just brought and over the Mishnah, or at least our inference from the Mishnah, and we're actually going to overturn everything we just said. The Tosefta here said that one or the other is obligated. Hold on, we have yet another braita that says medaber ve'eno shomea, shomea ve'eno medaber patur. One who is either deaf or only mute is exempt from it, right? Not only both, but even only one is exempt. That's the opposite. So either Ravina or Rava say, I will reconcile. Don't say it's a machloket between the Braitot and the Mishnah, but rather we're going to reconcile the Mishnah with the Braita. Right? It's quite amazing that we're actually preferring the authority of a Braita over the Tosefta and over the Mishnah. And we're going to reread the Mishnah. I put in green here all the words that we're adding, right? Chasura mechasera. It's missing words. Well, sometimes when you say that, you add one or two words just of explanation. But here, it's a very radical rereading. All the green words we're adding in new. Hakol chayavin bereiyah. That's a quote from the Mishnah. Everyone has to bring korban re'iyah. Ubasimcha. Oh, by the way, we forgot to mention that where this Mishnah is also dealing with the shalmei simcha. Everyone must bring both of them. Chutz me cheresh. And now that's the words from the Mishnah, but now we're adding in, except for cheresh. What kind of cheresh? Hamedaber ve'eno shomea, shomea ve'eno medaber, shepatur min hare'iyah. So everyone has to bring re'iyah and simcha, except if someone is mute or deaf, they do not bring a korban re'iyah. So you see, this backs the baraita we just had. And then it continues, but if you have only one or the other, although patur and re'iyah, he has to bring the shalmeh simcha. And that's why it says here, kol chayavin, meaning be'riyah u'besimcha is emphasized. But if someone is deaf and mute, now this is the next words of the Mishnah, they are exempt from everything because they're exempt from all mitzvot, so they're patur from all the types of korbanot. Okay, very radical rereading of the Mishnah, but at least now it fits into the baraita. And we actually have another baraita that says the exact same words as our fixed version of the Mishnah. See those exact words. That's the exact same words here, and the rest is all the same. Someone who has nothing, shoteh v'katan, that's the same as shoteh v'katan. They all are not of sound mind. Peturin af minam simcha, ho'ilu peturin mikol mitzvot amorot b'Torah, because they are exempt from everything in the whole Torah. And so I think what you see here is that where are they getting this chasureh machasera? Are they just making up 90% of the words and sticking them in? The answer is right here. They actually had another baraita that read precisely what same as this baraita that they brought here and elaborates on it. And so they're actually preferring the authority of this baraita and saying our Mishnah is just a shortened version of this long baraita. And if you want to know what the Mishnah really means, so look at the baraita, because that's the elaborated version. And so now we flipped everything we said before to say obligated, and in fact, no, someone who's only a deaf or a mute is in fact exempt. And on tomorrow's daf, we will give the sources for why they would be exempt. What the difference is between the different types of korbanot. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.